The coastal town of Whitby carried a stillness that never quite belonged to the living. The gulls cried above the harbour, and the waves lapped at the worn stone walls as if keeping time with the unseen rhythm of the sea. Yet inside Hollingworth and Sons, the oldest clock shop on Church Street, time itself had stopped. Eleanor Hollingworth stood behind the glass counter, her pale hands resting on the dusty surface. Around her, dozens of clocks, grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, pocket watches, stood silent, their pendulums frozen mid-swing. Every one of them had stopped at precisely 11:47. The time her husband, Thomas Hollingworth, had perished in the fire 2 years ago. People in town spoke kindly of her, though always in hushed tones. They said she was a gentle woman who refused to move on, that she spoke to the clocks when she thought no one was listening. Perhaps they were right, for on quiet evenings Eleanor could almost hear Thomas's voice whispering in the ticking silence that no longer existed. One grey morning, as the mist drifted in from the sea, the bell above the shop door tinkled softly. A young man stepped inside, shaking off the damp. He couldn't have been more than 25, with wind-tossed hair and curious eyes. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not intruding. I was told this is the best place in Whitby for clock repairs." Eleanor's gaze softened a little. "It was," she replied. "Though I don't do much repairing these days." He smiled, setting a small wooden box on the counter. "My grandmother's clock. It hasn't worked in years. I'd be grateful if you could take a look. My name's Samuel." Something about his voice unsettled her, a familiarity she couldn't place. Yet politeness prevailed, and she opened the box. Inside lay an ornate brass carriage clock, its glass cracked, but the hands still fixed stubbornly at 11:47. Her breath caught. "Where did you get this?" Samuel frowned. "It's been in my family for generations." "Why?" Eleanor stepped back, her eyes darting to the wall of clocks. For the briefest second, she thought she heard a faint tick. Then another. And then, from the corner of the room, the great-grandfather clock, Thomas's masterpiece, moved. Its pendulum swung once, heavy and deliberate, and a low chime rang out. 11:47. Eleanor's hand trembled. The sound she had longed for had finally returned, but it wasn't bringing peace. It was bringing him back. That night, the fog rolled in thick and heavy over Whitby Harbour. The street lamps along Church Street flickered weakly, their light swallowed by the mist. Inside the clock shop, Eleanor sat by the cold fireplace, her eyes fixed on the old photograph above the mantel, Thomas Hollingworth, standing proudly beside his finest creation, the great clock that now stood once again alive. She had not lit a fire since his death. It felt wrong to chase away the chill he had left behind. From the workshop at the back, the ticking continued, a slow, deliberate rhythm that grew louder as midnight approached. She rose, clutching her shawl, and stepped towards the door. Her hand hesitated on the handle. For the first time in 2 years, she was afraid to open that door. When she finally did, the air was thick with the scent of oil and ash. The great clock loomed before her, its pendulum swinging gently. But something else caught her eye. On the workbench, beneath a layer of soot, lay a small photograph she didn't remember keeping. She picked it up with trembling fingers. It was Thomas, smiling faintly, standing beside a young apprentice, Samuel. Her heart stuttered. The same face. The same eyes. But the photograph was dated 1896. 30 years ago. She dropped the picture, her pulse racing. The clock struck 12. Each chime echoed like a heartbeat through the empty shop. And between the strikes, she heard it, his voice. "Eleanor." She froze, her breath clouding in the cold air. "Thomas." "Eleanor, you must finish it." Her knees weakened. "Finish what?" But the voice was gone, replaced by the ticking, faster now, urgent. She stumbled back, knocking over a stack of dusty gears that clattered across the floor. Then she saw it, on the clock face, faint and glowing, were letters that hadn't been there before. Turn back the hour. The words faded as the last chime rang out, leaving her in the heavy silence once more. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, her thoughts spinning. Samuel, whoever he truly was, had brought something back into this world. And Thomas's unfinished work was calling for her to complete it. Outside, the fog pressed against the windowpanes, thick and unmoving, as if listening. The following morning arrived without sunlight. Whitby was shrouded in mist, and the cobblestones outside the shop gleamed with the residue of a sleepless night. Eleanor hadn't closed her eyes once. The words still burned in her mind, turn back the hour. She moved through the shop as though in a dream. The air was colder than usual, her breath visible even indoors. Every clock in the room stood silent again, except the great one. Its pendulum swayed steadily, though its face now bore a crack that spread like a vein across the glass. She went to the door and looked out. Samuel was standing across the street, his coat collar turned up against the damp air. He lifted a hand in greeting, smiling faintly, as if unaware of the storm that raged in her mind. "Morning, Mrs. Hollingworth," he called softly. "I hope I didn't trouble you yesterday." Eleanor hesitated before replying. "You didn't trouble me, Mr. Cole. But you brought something unexpected." He looked puzzled. "The clock." She nodded slowly. "It's running again. And it shouldn't be." He crossed the street, curiosity in his stride. When he entered the shop, the air shifted again, the same strange heaviness returning. Samuel looked around, fascinated by the silent forest of clocks. "It's beautiful here," he murmured. "But it feels as though time doesn't belong to this place." Eleanor studied him carefully. "You've been here before, haven't you?" Samuel frowned. "No, never." "Why do you ask?" She turned to the workbench and placed the old photograph before him. His expression changed instantly, his eyes widened, and a pale color drained from his face. His voice trembled. "That's impossible." "It was taken 30 years ago," Eleanor said quietly. "And yet it's you, Samuel. The same face. The same eyes." He stepped back, shaking his head. "I don't understand. My family never mentioned any connection to this place." "Your clock," she whispered. "It belonged to your grandmother. Tell me her name." He hesitated. "Eliza Vale." Eleanor's lips parted. The name hit her like a cold wind. "Eliza Vale died in the fire that took my husband." Samuel stared at her, stunned. "That's not possible." "My grandmother died peacefully, years later." But even as he spoke, the great clock began to hum. Its hands twitched, spinning backward one slow tick at a time. The air grew dense, heavy with static. Eleanor turned towards it, her voice trembling. "He's turning back the hour." Samuel took a step forward. "Who is?" The pendulum stopped. The hands froze at 11:47 once again. Then, faintly, from behind the glass, a shadow appeared, the outline of a man's face, pale and expressionless. Eleanor whispered his name before she could stop herself. "Thomas." The shadow's eyes opened. The silence that followed was unbearable. The great clock stood motionless, yet its presence filled the room like a heartbeat. Samuel and Eleanor stood frozen, the only sound their own uneven breaths. The shadow behind the glass seemed to shift, its gaze fixed directly on Eleanor. Then came the whisper. Soft at first, like wind through broken glass. "Eleanor, the hour must be restored." Samuel flinched. "Did you hear that?" Eleanor nodded, her lips trembling. He's trapped, within his own creation. The whisper grew louder, threading itself through the still air. "Turn the key." Free me before the time turns upon itself. Eleanor's eyes darted to the drawer beneath the workbench. Inside lay a rusted brass key, Thomas's final design. She hadn't touched it since the night of the fire. When she lifted it now, it felt warm in her palm, pulsing faintly, as though alive. Samuel stepped closer. Are you sure that's wise? Eleanor didn't answer. Her mind was filled with memories of Thomas bent over the workbench, his hands steady, his eyes alight with obsession. He had spoken of building a clock that could defy time itself, a clock that might hold a man's soul between its turning gears. She had dismissed it as madness. But now she wasn't so sure. She fitted the key into the base of the great clock. The metal clicked into place. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a deep groan echoed from within, followed by the sound of gears shifting, turning, awakening after years of silence. The air thickened. Dust swirled. The pendulum began to move again, but this time it swung backward. The hands of every clock in the shop trembled and followed suit, rewinding time in unison. Samuel stumbled back. Eleanor, stop it. You don't know what it'll do. But she couldn't stop. The force of it pulled her forward, her hand gripping the clock's frame as if drawn by something unseen. Through the glass, the shadow of Thomas grew clearer, his eyes, his mouth, his hand pressing from within, fingers splayed against the glass. And then he spoke again, louder this time, his voice filled with desperate longing. Just one more turn, my love. Bring me through. Eleanor's tears welled as the air around her began to hum. The shop trembled. Time itself seemed to bend, the ticking a rising storm. Samuel lunged forward, trying to pull her away. But the moment his hand touched hers, a blinding flash erupted from the clock. The sound of shattering glass filled the room. When the light faded, the pendulum stilled. The shop fell silent once more. Samuel stood alone. Eleanor was gone. And inside the glass of the great clock, two faces now stared out, side by side. The morning after the storm, Eleanor found the air heavy with damp earth and the scent of rain lingering on the moor. She moved through the house in silence, the wooden floors creaking beneath her bare feet. A strange calm had settled over Thornwell Manor, as though the house itself were waiting for something. In the study, she discovered a photograph frame lying face down on the floor, the glass cracked in a perfect line across the middle. She picked it up carefully and turned it over. The photograph inside showed a man and a woman standing before the very same oak tree that grew beyond her window. The woman wore a gown of lace and had Eleanor's eyes. The man, tall and stern, bore an uncanny resemblance to the portrait above the fireplace, the man from her dreams. A chill ran through her. She flipped the frame and noticed a date scrawled faintly on the back, 1887. Beneath it, a name had been written in faded ink, Eleanor Whitcomb. Her own name. Her breath caught. The handwriting was identical to the one in the journal she'd found in the attic. She remembered the words carved into the wooden floor beneath the window, "Remember me." A faint knock came at the front door, echoing through the halls. Eleanor froze. No one ever came this far from the village. Gathering her courage, she went to the door and opened it just enough to see who stood outside. A man in a dark coat, soaked to the bone, lifted his hat slightly. His face was pale, and his eyes, a piercing grey, seemed both kind and knowing. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said softly, as though greeting someone he'd known long ago. "You shouldn't be here. Not after what happened the first time." Eleanor's hand trembled on the door. "Who are you?" she whispered. He looked past her into the hallway, his expression shadowed with sorrow. "You'll remember soon enough," he murmured. "But when you do, it will already be too late." The wind howled once more, slamming the door shut between them. When Eleanor opened it again, the man was gone. Only a single, wet footprint remained on the doorstep, pointing inward, not out. And from somewhere deep within the manor, the grandfather clock began to chime, 13 times. The echo of the 13th chime lingered in the air like a warning that refused to fade. Eleanor's heart pounded as she stood motionless in the hallway, staring at the wet footprint that now seemed to darken before her eyes. She knelt to touch it, but her fingers met dry wood, the mark had vanished. Her breath came shallow. She turned towards the drawing room, every creak of the old floor sounding like a voice beneath her feet. She remembered the loose board near the hearth, the one she'd stepped on that made a hollow sound. Something inside her whispered to go back. Candle in hand, she crossed the room. The flicker of the flame danced along the cracked wallpaper and glinted off the portrait above the mantel. For a moment, she thought the eyes of the man in the painting had shifted, following her movements. "Stop it," she whispered to herself, forcing a breath. She crouched and pried at the loose plank. Beneath it lay a small compartment wrapped in layers of dust and cobwebs. Inside, she found a folded sheet of parchment tied with a faded blue ribbon. Her hands trembled as she untied it. The parchment contained a letter, written in the same handwriting as before. "To whoever finds this, you are me. You must not trust him. He walks between years, wearing the same face but never the same heart. When he returns, do not look into his eyes. That is how he remembers you." Eleanor's throat tightened. The signature at the bottom made her freeze. It read, Eleanor Whitcomb. The sound of footsteps echoed above her, slow, deliberate, pacing the corridor upstairs. She held her breath, clutching the letter to her chest. Then the voice came, soft, low, like someone speaking through the wood. "Why did you open it again, Eleanor?" She looked up sharply. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. Silence. Then, a creak, closer this time, as though someone were walking down the staircase. The candle flickered violently, and she could see the faint outline of a shadow stretching across the wall, long and distorted, though no one stood in the doorway. The clock in the hall struck once, and the portrait above the mantel fell with a crash. Behind it, carved into the wall, were words written deep into the plaster. "He has found you again." The morning broke grey over Whitby, a thin mist creeping in from the harbour and curling through the crooked lanes. Eleanor sat by the window, the letter clutched in her hand, watching the fog drift past the shop sign that read Hollingworth and Sons. She hadn't slept. Every sound of the night, every shifting floorboard, still echoed inside her skull. When the bell above the shop door rang, she nearly dropped her teacup. A man entered, his boots wet from the morning rain. He was tall, with a face both unfamiliar and somehow known, pale eyes, neat dark hair, and a faint scar beneath his left cheekbone. "Mrs. Hollingworth," he asked politely, removing his hat. "I believe you were expecting me." Her voice faltered. "I'm sorry, have we met?" The man smiled faintly. "Thomas sent me." Her heart lurched. The name struck like lightning. "Thomas," she whispered. "My husband is dead." He tilted his head. "Is he?" She froze. He walked closer, glancing around the shelves crowded with clocks, all still frozen at 11:47. His gaze lingered on the great brass timepiece Samuel had repaired days earlier. "He said you would know what to do when the 13th chime sounded," the man continued calmly. "He said you'd remember me." "I don't," she breathed. "You must be mistaken." The man gave a quiet, almost sorrowful smile. "No, Eleanor. You've simply forgotten again." A faint ticking began, slow, hesitant, like a heartbeat waking from slumber. One by one, the clocks in the shop started to move. Gears turned, pendulums swung, and the air filled with the murmuring rhythm of time returning. Eleanor backed away. "What are you doing?" "I'm not doing anything," he replied softly. "You are." The ticking grew louder, faster, until the sound was unbearable. Then all the clocks struck at once, a deafening wave of chimes that made the glass tremble in the windows. When the echoes faded, the man was gone. But in the reflection of the shop window, Eleanor saw something that made her blood run cold. Standing behind her, or perhaps within the reflection, was Thomas, her husband, his eyes hollow and shining like the inside of a clock. His lips moved soundlessly before a faint whisper filled the room. "Not yet, my love. Time isn't finished with us." The brass clock behind her ticked once more, and its hands began to turn backwards. The air in Whitby felt heavy with expectation. Eleanor's hands trembled as she watched the hands of the great brass clock spin backward, faster than ever. The ticking was deafening, and each pulse seemed to pull at the very fabric of the world around her. She realized, with a cold certainty, that Thomas was not simply a memory. He was a presence, trapped between the minutes he had so meticulously crafted. Every chime, every turn of the pendulum, brought him closer. "Eleanor," the whisper came again, this time inside her mind, echoing as if from within the gears themselves. "You must finish it. Restore the hour, or all is lost." Samuel appeared at her side, his face pale but resolute. "We have to stop this," he urged, but Eleanor shook her head. "No," she said. "This is the only way to bring him back. I have to finish what he began." She reached for the winding key, feeling the warmth pulsing like a heartbeat. Placing it in the slot at the base of the clock, she turned it slowly. The hands of the clock aligned perfectly with the 13th hour. A blinding light filled the room, and for a moment, Eleanor felt as though she was suspended between seconds. Then she heard it, the sound of Thomas's voice, clear and alive, calling her name. The shadow in the glass shifted, the hollow eyes filling with recognition and relief. "Eleanor," he whispered, "you found me." And as the pendulum completed its final swing, the clock stopped. The world seemed to exhale. Time in Whitby resumed its natural flow. Sunlight broke through the morning mist, spilling across the harbour, and Eleanor felt warmth in her chest she hadn't known since the fire that took him away. Thomas stepped out of the glass, solid and real, reaching for her hand. Eleanor took it without hesitation, feeling the pulse of life in his fingers. Behind them, the clocks remained silent, their purpose fulfilled. For the first time in years, Eleanor and Thomas stood together, the shadows of the past finally lifted. And though Whitby would always whisper of strange happenings, the couple knew that some hours were meant to be restored, and some love was strong enough to defy time itself.